There we go. Welcome. My name is Stephen Acker. I'm president of DACC, and I'd like to welcome all of you here. It's the start of Mental Health Awareness Month. We have some great service providers here. I see Jim Russell among them in the audience. We have some service providers on our panel today. Students and staff, you're here. Thank you for being here. And what I would like to do now is introduce one of the real enlightened souls. Some of you as the students know, Dr. Jonathan Wade is one of the great hires since I've been here at DACC. We're so happy to have him here. We're happy every time. And I see in this class, we're sitting there and we're just talking and you're working stuff out, psych, sociology. Thank you for being our students and thank you for being his students. Dr. Jonathan Wade.
Hello. Welcome to Mental Health Awareness Month. Thank you for the panelists. Just going to kind of outline the process we're going to do. Introduction to mental health.
Switch mics
up. Mental health awareness. There we go. Okay. Mental health is more common than we like for it to be. In an effort to help support those in need, we wanted to bring some of the agencies from our community to talk about how they can help you or someone that you love or may be in contact with in your personal life or your educational life. So I'm going to do a brief introduction. And I'm going to allow the panel I'm going to encourage the panel to introduce themselves. And then we're going to run through a few questions that are specifically directed to our keynote guest. And then we are going to ask the student body if they have any questions to please fill out an index card so that we can fill those questions and our panel can speak to those questions. Also a reminder, most important reminder, after this event there is free food, so please stick around. Once again, for all of my college students, free food. Okay, excellent. So with great honor, I am introducing a colleague of mine and a friend of mine, Dr. Christopher Dahl. A brief background on Christopher, or Dr. Dahl, sorry, Dr. Dahl. He did his undergraduate work at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, graduated in 1989 in Spanish literature. He went on, had to mention that, Spanish literature. Went on to the University of Indiana and studied law and earned a Juris Doctorate. Practiced corporate law for 3 years and then went to medical school at Vanderbilt University of Medicine in Nashville, Tennessee, and is a 2001 graduate. Did his postdoctoral training as a resident at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. And over the last 20 years, he has worked as a medical director, as an patient psychiatrist and patient psychiatrist, and is currently just opened his own practice in Zionsville, Indiana. So I would welcome him. There we go. Okay. So right now, I would just like to take a few minutes for the panel to introduce themselves, name, organization they're with, and where you guys are located.
I'm Gail Rainey. I'm the administrator for the Substance Abuse Prevention and Treatment Services for Rosecrans in Central Illinois.
I'm Sherry Askren, president of United Way here in Danville, and we're in charge of Vermillion County as well as Fountain and Warren County in Indiana, and we're at 28 West North Street, which everybody says across from the Deluxe Restaurant.
My name is Nina O'Brien. I am the local recovery coordinator for VA Atlanta, and we are located right over there.
My name is Tara Wright. I work for the Survivor Resource Center, formerly the Vermillion County Rape Crisis Center. I'm the Prevention Education and Outreach Awareness Director, and I'm a sexual assault therapist. And our new location is at 923 North Vermillion, which is just a little bit north of Royal Donut.
Hello. My name is Natalia Warren, and I am a therapist at Crosspoint Human Services. I am in our Intensive Behavioral Support Services Division, and we are located at 210 Avenue C, which is in the Heights off of 150.
Excellent. We basically have four questions I'm going to ask Dr. Dahl to provide us some brief answers to, and then we would like to turn that over to you guys. If there's any specific questions that relate to psychiatry before we get into the panel questions. So feel free to start filling those cards out, passing them. Who should they collect them from?
If you need a card, I have some. If you need it collected, any of us, we have that.
All right, excellent. We have DACCs. First question is, what are a few misconceptions or misunderstandings about mental illness? Absolutely.
I get restless. So one of the misconceptions is John thinks he's a doctor, and we've all come here to sort of interview he doesn't realize it, but we'll take care of him before it's all done. I think the misconceptions about mental health are kind of different across the age bands. So I know you all are adolescents, but where I see it first, because I don't usually take care of adolescents, but I'm so close to two high schools that all of a sudden I'm taking care of a lot of adolescents. But when kids develop like ADD or ADHD or depression, it's particularly hard for the ADD, ADHD kids, right? Because one of their problems is, your frontal lobes are up here, and part of them is the thing that creates a beat before you say what you would like to say to somebody, right? So before you say something bad, it's like, maybe not. And it also allows you to organize tasks, right? So this same thing is lost when people develop Alzheimer's type dementia. They can't really execute a task. So for example, my mother, God bless her, she had all these recipes, right? Now, and as an advance, if you said, Mom, make your special cake, that ain't gonna happen, right? She might be able to pull together some ingredients, but the concept of her like putting in 2 eggs, and then it doesn't happen anymore. So your ability to break down and execute a task deteriorates. And in the same way, kids whose frontal lobes are not developed and their ability to do this is impaired, it's like there's a triple whammy involved. The other one is they can't sit still. So imagine, I don't know, you're a first grade teacher, you have Jim who has ADHD. You tell him to wait in line for Jim. Jimmy's going to jump out of line 5 times because he's impulsive, he's hyperactive, and what's going to happen is we're going to assume as supervisors that Jimmy's just like every other kid, and if you yell at him or do whatever, that's going to help him not do that. But to the ADHD kid, that means nothing. In about 5 seconds, he's going to have no inhibitions, he's going to jump online, right? So these kids early on get labeled as kids who misbehave. They don't listen. Their problem, it doesn't matter. I send them to the principal's office, they do the same thing, right? So they get labeled as a bad kid, their social skills are poor. So the kids kind of marginalize them. And then they struggle at school because they have a hard time with executive function. But often these kids are extremely intelligent. So it's the same distribution, in other words, of intelligence. So the impediment at that point is a parent like thinking that their kid's a bad kid, which is horrific. They have to know that there are services available and that this sort of disorder exists. They have to get over the stigma of saying or not saying that Jimmy is going to a psychiatrist, right? Because in different parts of the country, it's psychiatry, right? You don't talk about it, right? Like I still have parents like, you're not going to tell anybody, are you? You know. So, so with kids, what you see is if this is a normal, you know, Joe average trajectory of success over time, right? When kids develop something like ADD or depression, their trajectory starts to go like this, and there's a huge gap, right? So you have to fill that gap by treating the underlying psychiatric illnesses, and then they can catch up. But they've lost a lot of area under that graph. I think that we see this, I know we see in adults, right? But as we grow older, our frontal lobes develop better and we compensate better for that. Well, we don't compensate well for our mood disorders. So the first thing with mood disorders, you have to recognize that you might have one. And am I answering the question right? Because I just go off. So one of the impediments is you have to recognize that a mood disorder might exist. One of the things I struggle with a little bit is people are like, yeah, I mean, you know, I'm depressed, but I have nothing to be depressed about. I have $1 million in a car and a beautiful wife. Which goes to the fundamental misunderstanding we have about depression. It's not about your mood and your circumstances. When people become depressed, it's part of a cyclic disease generally, where your circumstances don't matter. You are a loser in your mind, a failure, you're inadequate, you'll never achieve anything, you never have. You don't take pleasure out of life anymore. You know, normally you might like to go to the movies with your friend or whatever. You don't enjoy that anymore. You stay to yourself a lot more and you feel hopeless all the time. You may or may not cry because in depression, the mood is not necessarily sadness. It can be feeling empty. It can be feeling angry. It can be a lot of anxiety. A lot of times in young kids, anxiety and irritability are a big part of it. So first of all, one of the misconceptions is our misconception, which is being sad about something bad is the same as being depressed. So what I tell my patients is I could dump $1 million in a pile right there. And if you have depression, if your depression is clearing in about a day or two, that's going to be a burden to you somehow. In some way, that $1 million is going to be messing up your life because it's not circumstance driven. It can be. It can be when your mom died and there may be a trigger, but only about 50% of people do we identify a clear trigger. So the other 50% it just sneaks up on them. So the first thing is a bit of education. I think the other misconception is on the other side of things. We sort of talked about it in people who supervise young kids. I mean, because 90% of kids respond to the carrot and stick the way we expect, but the outliers of psychiatric illness, the carrot and stick doesn't work. So the easiest thing is to use more carrot, more stick. And when it doesn't work, then the kid's a bad kid. And it's all bad from there. As we age, and I didn't really talk about mania, which is the other component in bipolar disorder, but as we age, now mood disorders are much more disruptive. So from the outside, right, when people develop mood disorders, they can't concentrate well, they don't want to do anything, they don't see a point in anything, and it's hard just to get out of bed and hang out. Well, imagine what happens to their grades. They don't see a point in going to class. They can't concentrate. They're a failure. They always knew they were a failure. Why would they even try? So you will see a precipitous drop in grades. Like, you know, you're going through your freshman year, you're doing great, 3 point, whatever. But all of a sudden, you start taking a dive. And your parents are like, what the hell are you doing? You know, get up and get to class. You know, so the initial thought is you're lazy. And you're not trying hard enough, and why am I paying this money for you to go to school? And it's not because the parents are bad people. Again, they're expecting that the same stimuli are causing you to do this. But again, this is an internal disease process, and it doesn't really care. Again, if we as humans who suffer from it, or we as people who help them do not recognize this phenomenon, then it never enters our vocabulary. You know, it's a case of you don't know what you don't know. And that's bad, right? Because people kill themselves, people drop out of school. I've had a lot of people with depression drop out of school because they're not performing anymore and they don't know why they would. And their parents, again, think they're lazy. And guess what? They can't get a job because it's a chore for them to just get out of bed. And they look slovenly a lot of times because they don't, some people won't shower for a week. So the misconceptions are based, I think, a lot on our expectations of 90% of the population, or whatever percentage, right? And anytime people deviate from that, we look to circumstances to explain it, right? And so the obvious circumstance or the personal flaw in the person who's not performing in school anymore is it's their fault. And a lot of times for people who aren't invested in getting the problem, that could be our parents, our friends, it becomes your fault. They just turn it back on you. Well, maybe if you get out of bed and exercise, right? Or maybe if you tried a little harder and went to the TA or whatever. I'm not saying it's a component, but we always have to consider somebody's personality within the context that they're suffering from the disease. There's this famous guy, Osler. I'm going to go to Johns Hopkins, so I get to quote him. Those are the only ones I know. Osler said, it's not what disease a person has, it's what person has a disease, right? So somebody whose personality type tends to be live in the moment or whatever versus somebody who's very conscientious and worried about the future. The person who's always conscientious and worried about the future is going to get so anxious that in 5 years they're going to get cancer from the exposure to that one cigarette that they lock up. Where the person in the moment's like, I don't care, and it doesn't matter, I'm going to drink a beer, I'm going to get high or whatever, and then we'll see what tomorrow brings. So it'll manifest itself differently. But I think those are the misconceptions we have, and we can talk about a lot of different disorders. But it's really education and ignorance. And ignorance is not meant as a pejorative term, it's just that we don't know about it. And if we don't know about it as potential patients, and we don't know about it as people who love other people with it, it's easy for us to make the kind of mistakes that just makes the person with depression feels worse because they think it's their fault, which they already knew it was their fault to begin with because they're depressed.
I think you covered on three.
Sorry.
So, don't worry, my students are usually
Flying me with coffee before I came.
So question for, sorry, my last question before we move to the panel, or to the audience, is how can we empower individuals to seek mental health treatment if they are reluctant?
Everybody's reluctant. I mean, we're just not at a point yet where, like, your stomach hurts, you go in. Because, like, we all thought people were freaky, right? When I grew up, people who were gay, they killed themselves. Okay, they just weren't going to tell anybody, and it was terrible, right? A little bit better with that than depression, but there's still a stigma associated with it. And then if you talk about bipolar disorder and manic depression, ooh, and you talk about lithium, that's a strong, right? So there's a lot of avoidance still, and a lot of it is based in the idea that somehow mental illness is worse than diabetes, right? But they're all diseases of the normal processes in our body. We break them down into GI, cardiovascular, because we got to study them that way. It's your whole body. It's irrelevant. Okay, so from tip to top, it's all part of it, and they inform one another. So, for example, there is recent evidence that the flora, the bacteria in your gut, actually affect depression and your mood. Right? So we're going to discover this more and more as we get more sophisticated in the body. I think more on a molecular level. But it ain't, you know what I mean? It's all one thing. But because there's a stigma in mental health, I think taking the first step towards getting help is the hardest. Because in a way you have to admit there's something wrong with you. Or if you go, it's a concession that your mom was right. Or somebody was right. So I think that's one of them. The other one we talked about is ignorance. And again, not in a malicious way. Just, we don't know about it. Right? We know that our Aunt Sally has depression, but I don't know what that is. There's also, I find a lot in my own practice, which is about 10% of people who have depression, for example, they hear voices, they're usually derogatory voices, or they develop delusions like they're being chosen by God to be punished, or they have some fatal disease that's not going to get better. And so you have to ask that question. And when you ask that, people are really reluctant to say it because then they think that means they're crazy, which we all get what that lay term means, right? But there ain't no way I'm talking about that, you know? But it's actually a natural part of depression about 10% of the time. And that can be a barrier, right? Because they're really afraid it's going to be exposed that they're way out there. All mental illness is just an illness. The other thing I think is availability to resources. We were just having a really nice talk about 211. And I think that what we don't know is a lot of times they're called crisis lines, which to me means like call if you're suicidal. This is just like, I don't know if I have depression or not. You know, it's just a way to initiate it with anonymity. And they can provide resources for you. If you think that your friend or you're depressed, they're going to manifest the things that we talked about. They don't want to get out of bed. They stop taking the checkbook. They stop taking as good care of themselves. They don't hang out with their friends anymore. They always want to stay in. And their friends sort of like, what's that about? They don't go to classes. They don't study. So they're essentially sort of falling apart. And it's tricky, but you could say something like, thought about calling 211, maybe it's depression. And it's tricky because some people take offense at that. But I find a lot of patients who take offense when I ask them, it's because they're really scared of having it. So they'll be insulted in a way. And you have to get that past that a bit. But you have to destigmatize and say, hey, this happens. It's extremely common. And it doesn't care how much money you make. It doesn't care if you're the king of Prussia. It doesn't care if you live on the streets. It doesn't distinguish that. Same with diabetes could care less about who you are. You know, I mean, it's just these things. We don't really understand why they come up, but it's not exclusive to certain groups of people. Sometimes females, there's a slightly higher prevalence in females, but it's not hormones. It's not as simple as hormones. I mean, that's what everyone thinks. It's not. He's sitting down now.
Thank you. Are there any questions from you guys? Any cards in the baskets? Or actually, where are the baskets? And there's no cards in the baskets. Okay. Anyone have a question? They didn't want to write down, but they would like to ask. Yes.
So I feel like a lot of people talk about things around people who aren't high functioning, and mental illness affects people who are
You guys here?
high functioning.
Kind of like The Price is Right. Good, another question.
Okay, so how does this manifest in people who are still high functioning? Because I feel like a lot of what you talked about are people who don't manage to function while they're depressed or have anxiety.
Did you say how does it manifest in people who are higher functioning?
Yeah, and you still have like somebody can have anxiety or depression. Like somebody with depression can still get out of bed and take showers and still go to work,
Yeah.
but it's still you're still depressed. Or they're very.
Because it's hard for me to hear you. Do you mean that people who aren't so bad that they're not getting out of bed, how do you address it? Yeah. So what the evidence is that that level of sort of the moderate to mild, there are multiple approaches. One thing is called cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's a very specific therapy. It's not like a little of this and a little of that. And cognitive behavioral therapy has been shown repeatedly to help people who have mild or moderate depression. And it's based on the concept that what you think and how you interpret things affects how you feel, right? And it's good for anxiety, and it's good for depression, and a number of other things. So pursuing cognitive behavioral therapy is really good. Medicines are really effective. And the other question is there, do you want to be, how do you feel about medicine? And there are other therapies that are helpful. And then sometimes, people can try to write it out and see how they do. We know that exercise is helpful for your mood at that time, and also probably is helpful as a prophylactic against depression. But I think if you think you're depressed, just ask. We call 211 or whatever, and maybe you're not. But also you can get resources. right? So, oh, yeah, there's a therapist on Maple Street, you know, and find out what kind of treatment you can get there. Does that answer your question?
Anyone else just want to see me run? There we go. Camera.
No, I just wanted to see you run.
Oh, that's fine. All right, excellent. Gotta get all my steps in, you know, living in a Fitbit world. Excellent. All right. So we have just a few questions that we'd like to ask the panel, and if you guys just would like to give us some quick answers. This is a two-part question. And then once again, after we go through the panel questions, we are going to turn that back over to you guys in the index cards. And I may have some follow-up questions for you guys as well. So for our panelists, can you briefly describe some of the services your organization offers to the general public? And what steps an individual would take to begin accessing services in your organization?
I probably don't need this. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, I have a pretty big voice. Thank you. Just in case I need that, I'll lean in. So at Crosspoint, we have several different services. There is nursing. We have a really big vocational department that is for adults with developmental disabilities. They come in every day and they learn independent living skills. There is a PSR department, which is for the higher functioning adults that also have been diagnosed with a developmental disability, and they go out into the community. They have teachers there who kind of help them to be more independent and learn skills that it may take someone with normal abilities or able-bodied to kind of catch up a little bit. Sometimes with those with a developmental disability, they learn a little bit slower than those with normal functioning. So they have that support there. We also have an outpatient counseling department where you can just come and say, hey, I need somebody to talk to, or I'm going through something and I just need some support from someone. You can come there and say, hey, how do I do that? And you literally come to the front desk and say, this is what I need. And there will be someone who will direct you on what to do. You'll have an intake where someone will sit with you and talk to you about what you need, kind of get some history from you. We also have an IBSS department, which is where the department that I work in, we contract with the schools in District 118, and I go out to all of, I go to the high school, I go to Southview and Northridge, and I get to talk to the kids there who have been referred from these schools as either having some type of behavioral issue, anger, any type of behavioral need, even if they just, like, some of them have recent loss, grief, all kinds of issues that may come about. And so they refer them to our program, and I just go and hang out with them at school, and we see them like weekly. I will come there and see those kids. I do have some kids that aren't in the program that parents are like, will you please help me? I'm having trouble with my kid, and they'll come there. So we also have a crisis intervention department, which is like Doctor was saying, it's where you can call. It's a hotline. You can call or you can walk in and say, hey, I need help right now. I don't have time to go through an intake process. I need help right now. And there's always someone there. It's 24 hours a day on the phone, and there's someone there during the day as well. So we're there till 8 o'clock on Mondays in the evenings, and we're there every day till 5 the rest of the week. On Fridays, some of the therapists take that as a half day since we work long days throughout the week. So just consider that piece. But we have a lot of services. So if you are in need and need someone to talk to and need someone to maybe just give you some skills to get through, just call Crosspoint. The table's up there. There's lots of information. You can come to me directly. I think I'm pretty approachable. So you can come and talk to me. Don't be afraid to speak out, guys. I know this can be awkward and it can be a little nerve-wracking. So just, don't be afraid to go and talk to someone. So, like that.
Okay, again, my name is Tara, and I'm with the Survivor Resource Center, formerly the Vermilion County Rape Crisis Center. The first thing I'll say is all services that we provide are free and very confidential. We do not charge for anything that we want to provide to a survivor, their significant other, or any family member that might be impacted by the trauma that's happened to the survivor. It kind of spirals out, becomes the trauma of everybody involved. So we want to make sure that everybody understands that. Again, I could probably talk a really long time about services because I do it often, but just as a breakdown for our different departments, our counseling therapy department, again, we're there for the survivor, significant others, family members, people that have been impacted. Whether we're working with the individual just on a one-to-one basis in therapy, whether we're looking at that they need couple therapy for them and their significant other, family therapy. We do teen and family group as well as adult group in regards to getting people together once they know they've established they're not alone and they're willing to talk to other people, other survivors that this has happened to, okay? That's kind of a breakdown there as far as in counseling. Along with it too, we try to make as many accommodations as we can in order to provide services to survivors. So if we are talking about somebody that's, in the school system, K through 12, we will accommodate by seeing them at school in a private location so that they don't feel that they have to ask to come to our office. Or maybe there's just not that ability by their care providers or guardians, parents, to get them there. We have set up services out here at DACC for walk-in, and we want to continue to do that. We also find different locations within the communities in order to, best meet the needs of those survivors. So we want to make sure that, we try to take everything into account. During the summers, of course, is where, as a therapist, I don't want to go 3 months without seeing, one of my younger kids, especially if we're right in the process of healing and where they are in their journey. So we'll set up with different libraries and churches for private locations too, so we're always able to find something. So we don't want anybody to be afraid that they can't get to us. We're going to do our best to get to you. Our legal medical advocacy department. This is where somebody might be going through the court system for the first time in their life in regards to their offender and what's happened to them. We want them to know that they are fully supported by, our agency in regards to understanding that system, especially if they've never been through it before, and what their options and choices are going to be. We always want to make sure that everybody understands what their rights are, what confidentiality means, and that somebody else isn't telling them differently. We are going to make sure that, we're the backbone for those that are very scared, very confused, very frustrated, very fearful, and understanding what the state's attorney's office might be doing, what your local law enforcement is trying to do for you. We do work closely with all these departments because, again, we as a task force for, this organization, we all need to work together. So whether it's DCFS, law enforcement, our local emergency department, we're going to continue to work together for the survivor. So in the advocacy department, again, we are able to assist in orders of protection, emergency contact, orders, things like that. So, and we're going to do all that paperwork and sit with the survivor and make sure that everybody that could possibly be, impacted by it is covered within the system, especially if that offender is still out there in the community and isn't at, the local PSP or already in prison. We provide case management. We have found in years going on that when somebody's coming in for therapy, a lot of times the first thing that's in front of them is things that are happening day to day, whether it's I can't pay my power bill, I don't have food for my kids, I don't know where we're going to live. So in order for us not to forget how important therapy is to work through trauma, we've got a case manager that's going to take on those frontal fears and problems that are happening in our day-to-day life. And we reach out, we make a lot of referrals if it's something that we cannot do for them, but we can get them that assistance that they need. So again, it's still looking at the person, looking at the survivor as a full circle and seeing What is it you need? Let's break it down so that we don't forget about your trauma as we try to get you to a better place. Our education department, I don't want to forget about that because that's one of the reasons I'm a director. Our education department is growing. As far as prevention education and outreach awareness, we are trying to be everywhere. And if I didn't mention before, we do not serve just Vermilion County. We also oversee Edgar and Northern Clark. As a coalition, ICASA, which is the Illinois Coalition Against Sexual Assault, is our governing body. So every county in the state is covered by ICASA and by a rape crisis center. So we don't want to leave anybody out that, they cannot get a service that's close to them. We try to make that, as close as possible throughout the state. Well, with our education, from professional trainings, I'm sitting with other victim providers, law enforcement, state's attorney's offices, in order to build our coalition as a community in regards to, are we believing the victim? Are we believing the survivor? What are we doing about our community and the things that are happening in regards to violence, not just in the sexual assault realm, but in all the realms that we see it, okay? In our schools, we are continuing to work with CDC and public health for them to understand that dosage and curriculum is very important as far as being proactive and reactive to the things that are happening when we're talking about bullying, somebody understanding what body safety is, that they're the boss of their bodies. So when I'm talking with the little kids, or I'm talking to a senior who's getting ready to come to DACC or another college on understanding what sexual harassment really means, before they get in the workforce, or maybe it's happening to them and they just didn't know that it's wrong, okay? So again, there's a lot of information, in regards to our education and how we continue to grow that. Again, all free, it's all confidential. A lot of times when we're providing education, we're getting disclosures. So again, we follow through with all of that. Our referral base is very strong and very large. When we know that somebody has more than just trauma of sexual assault, and they maybe need to see somebody at Crosspoint, or there's a substance abuse problem. We want to be able to reach out to everybody in network to make sure all their needs are being covered. We have a volunteer program, so anybody that might be interested in going through a 40-hour crisis intervention, you could be a part of that program for our awareness, the fundraising we do, and most definitely our crisis line. Our crisis line, is 24 hours. You're always able to get a hold of us, walk in, or just calling us at the office. And we have our information out in the lobby as well, so that everybody can grab a brochure and know exactly how to contact myself or anybody else in the department. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Everybody hear me okay? Okay. So like I said, my name is Nina O'Brien, and I am the local recovery coordinator at the VA here in Danville. So part of my role is to kind of work within all of our mental health programs to make sure that they are basically doing what they're supposed to be doing as far as being recovery oriented. So at the VA, obviously we're serving veterans and their family members. We have a really wide range of services, so I don't know that I'll be able to name all of them, but we have a large pamphlet about all of our services. But we have sort of a continuum. We have an inpatient mental health, so folks that are in crisis or having psychiatric crisis can come to the VA and get assistance and stay inpatient. We have a residential program for folks that maybe are not in immediate crisis but need some assistance with substance use, housing, mental health needs such as PTSD, anxiety, depression, post-deployment issues, all that sort of stuff. So that program is roughly a 12-week program. Then we have a large outpatient program, kind of specialized into sort of general mental health issues, then PTSD, which can be combat or non-combat. Also providing services for survivors of military sexual assault. We have a substance abuse program. That is I believe, 6 to 7 week program, all day rehabilitation. We have employment services for veterans. We have housing services for veterans who are homeless or at risk of being homeless. We also provide assistance to couples and folks who are experiencing intimate partner violence. So that's probably just even a handful of some of the stuff we provide. But if you have specific questions about, say, am I eligible, or how can I help a veteran who's potentially in need, myself and one of my colleagues will be out in the lobby providing all kinds of information, especially about eligibility, because that can be a bit tricky to get someone in. Of course, I'll mention the Veterans Crisis Hotline. That's also available for any veteran 24 hours a day, and they will get immediate assistance.
Good afternoon. So I'm Sherry Askren with United Way, and we provide several programs in the community, 17 different agencies that we fund programs through. I think the main reason I am probably here is the 211 cards that I hope all of you know of. And you've heard just about everyone up here talk about calling in to, crisis line. What's the number, right? Nobody, there are usually quite a few digits long, aren't they? So that's why we have the 211 line, which I brought a box of cards. You dial 211, just like you would dial 911. And someone on the other end, a live person, will assist you. Now, of course, 211 is not just a crisis line, but it is through PATH Crisis. Providing access to help is what the PATH stands for. So PATH Crisis 211. Most of the calls they get are actually if someone is about to get evicted from their home, or their lights are going to get shut off and they're looking for resources to help them. If they call my office here in Danville, I never refer someone to 211 because I know where the resources are. If I don't, I sure should. And I'll find it usually. So anyway, so the 211, that's all it is, 211. I encourage everybody to have one of these, put it in your glove box, in your wallet. You never know when you're going to come across somebody who needs help, and how easy is it to just dial 3 digits, right? So that's why we have that. It's a 24/7 line, confidential. You never have to worry about any information getting out. I think that's kind of the key thing. Sometimes we're leery of letting somebody know that we have an issue, and so we keep it to ourselves. So if we can have that line and a person to talk to, that's what it's there for. I've had individuals, but usually they're at their wit's end when they call me actually at my office, and we have helped a couple young men actually, and then usually crossword somebody has to step in and help us too. But I'm always there to listen. A lot of times people family members have helped and try to help, and they said I'm done. And then by the time they're really ready to get help, they don't have anybody there for them. So I'm always say I'm a fresh ear, so you can always call me. I'd love to talk to anybody and help them. I never want to see anybody struggling, we have a lot of lives we've lost in this town, and we don't want to keep seeing that either. So, but anyway, the 211 is our main service. I think that is the reason I'm here today anyway. But we do fund a lot of the, like with Gail and with Crosspoint and I'm going to say it wrong, but your survivor resource, I still want to say Vermillion County Crisis Center. We do a lot. We help provide funds for the education part, because we want to keep, maybe mental health or whatever things from happening. So anyway, that's where we're going to be.
Oh, we've got people sleeping out there, I think.
I'm Gail Rainey. I'm the administrator at Rosecrans. We provide both mental health and substance abuse treatment services and prevention services. In Vermillion County, though, we focus on substance abuse treatment and prevention because we have really good providers already in Vermillion County that we partner with. I think the big takeaway for the people here today can be that there's really no wrong door. If you come to any one of our agencies, or if you call any one of our agencies, we can help connect you to the right place. So if you have a sense, I heard about the question with the how do I know if I'm high functioning type of a question, any one of us can help direct you to the right place. And don't be afraid to ask the question. I think that's the biggest thing, is just don't be afraid to call or come in. We will help you at any one of our locations. For Rosecrans, the substance abuse treatment, the question was how do we get into services? Literally, you can call our 888 number or come into, we take walk-ins, and we'll do either a phone assessment or a walk-in assessment and find out which of the services we provide are appropriate for you. We have everything from adolescent through adult services, including early intervention. So just someone who's even at risk for developing a substance use disorder, will help them all the way through to we provide inpatient care at our residential in Champaign. So we have early intervention, outpatient, intensive outpatient, and residential services. A whole bunch of clinical speak for if you have a question, come and ask us, and we'll help you figure out what your needs are and what services will help you the best. We're also there for families and loved ones who've been impacted by substance use disorders, because it's another illness that doesn't impact just the person with the illness, but also impacts the family. A lot of times we'll